All right, everyone. Happy New Year, and welcome to the first episode of CorwoodCast. It's a new video cast and podcast entirely devoted to the music and mythos of the one and only Jandek and the label Corwood Industries that puts the stuff out. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with Jandek and want to familiarize yourself, you can do so with a quick search and see for yourself, or you might get a pretty good read on the project from this episode. Um, I'd recommend checking the album out that we actually talk about in this episode called You Walk Alone, which is up on YouTube in its entirety. So that's a good starting point, and it's definitely a tuneful one and gives you a good idea of the project. So so this episode was done like months ago now. I think we did this back in like late October. And this took a lot of editing. I meant to have this out before the end of the year. I meant to have this out around Christmas time and stuff, but it took time. And I think we originally talked for about 4 hours, and this is edited down from 4 hours to about an hour and 40 minutes, and it's still long. But I mean, this is the first episode of the show, and we had a lot to talk about, and me and Will will jump from one thing to the other. So it's still long, but I'm sure it'll get easier to make these episodes kind of a more reasonable length the more we do this. So if the editing seems a bit off, just don't worry about it. Please excuse it, because, I try my best to make it flow nicely. But this is the first episode, so it'll only get easier and stuff from here. So this is just a start, but hopefully you get a kick out of this, and hopefully you have as much as fun geeking out with us about this record as we did while making it. So here it is. This is the first episode of CorwoodCast, and it is episode 1, You Walk Alone, Corwood 0754. So thank you and Happy New Year.
You grew up in Houston, which is where, for those who don't know, obviously Corwood is based out of. And so how did you come across these records? Like, how old were you when this stuff kind of was around? Like, did you see it in stores down there?
So I moved to Houston when I was 11 in 1987, which is a really great reference point, because most of the Jandek records which really resonate with me are in that like 87, 88 time period where he kind of goes more electric. And it's interesting to think back sort of what was going on in Houston at the time culturally. White boy funk was the primary popular music genre at the time. I think it was sort of a like hardcore had happened, and a lot of it sort of passed on, and like music sort of split into two genres essentially then, where it's like those who were, tough guys kind of went in this like pig fuck direction, where you had up in Austin like the Scratch Acids and like the whole Butthole Surfers thing going on, and then this other side which was more like the party boy approach.
So the Chili's were huge there, for example. Like the Chili Peppers were hit hard there.
They represented. And I think it was also sort of that like looking to Los Angeles as like, a reference point of what's hip and what's cool. And just sort of that transition period of 87 to 88, like jams were these sort of very colorful beach shorts was sort of like the style thing. So the music sort of correlated with that. Tim Kerr of the Big Boys, and probably one of the sort of the most prominent figures within Texas hardcore to a certain extent, was in a band at the time called Bad Mother Goose. Just to sort of, and they're a terrible white boy funk band. So that was sort of the musical climate, which I entered into. The predominant or popular white boy funk band in Houston at the time was a band called Sprawl, who are god awful.
I remember we had Sprawl driving around in your car.
I was of
Sprawl.
A certain age, that was sort of the end, like local music entry point for me. It's like I had some older friends who were, hung out at the comic book shop, and they were teaching me stuff, and it was like that sprawl tape, man, it just got played out, and that sort of put me into going to shows. And then like I quickly learned that, there's these record stores and there's local music, and this is how we we interact with our scene. The main drag in Houston is a street called Westheimer, and they would have an annual Westheimer street arts fair, which would span the entire drag, which was probably about 2.5 to 3 miles long. Bands playing, and in the Montrose area, which is sort of the heart of Houston, which was also at the time sort of the largest gay community in Houston. So it's like, gay community and arts community intersecting, and the hip area.
Right.
And the main record store, which I went to as a kid, so there was about a half dozen record stores in the Montrose. But the one for me, which was really my entry point, was Sound Exchange on Westheimer. And Sound Exchange were pretty hip, so there's sort of the crusty old dude record stores, and there's Sound Exchange where like all the employees played in crazy bands. Bliss Blood from the Paintings, who were also like kind of a noise underground band. She worked there, and Tom Carter of the Charlarmides and Mike Gunn also worked there, and with Christina, his partner at the time. And so they were really, Sound Exchange as a shop was pretty cutting edge. They were pushing Spaceman 3 records. I remember as a little guy seeing Spaceman 3 records on the wall, and sort of like, these are cool records.
Right.
Back then, in like 88, 89.
They were carrying the stuff you would like read about and stuff like Op or Force Exposure, like those.
Yeah, they were fully dialed into the Force Exposure Op like scene. Kurt, who worked there, was a very influential figure in my musical development. As a little guy, I'd gone to a Sonic Youth show, which Pavement opened up for, and it was like that exposed me to Pavement, and I went and bought the Pavement record. And Kurt was like, "You should check out the Royal Trucks," and that was my introduction. And not only should I check them out, hold on, come back next week. Here's some zines I have, with Royal Trucks interviews, and like, just really kind of like, here's this cool youth, like, let's put like, you like this Pavement stuff? Like, it's all right. Check this shit out.
Right.
But Sound Exchange is where I first came across Jandek records. They had like in the bins, they had a Corwood section. And it was like literally every Jandek record. And they were $1.99 a piece, I recall. And this would have been about like 1990.
Wow.
Like when I first, recognized this section. I was oblivious to what any of this was, but there's sort of this memory of this like bin of Corwood and all these weird records which look alike. And at that point in time, I'm buying, bad white boy funk cassettes, not at all cool kid at that stage.
So how old were you at this time? Because what's funny about the Corwood section is I had a similar experience when I worked Feeding Tube. Jack Rose's entire collection came to us when he passed through his widow. And I just remember having the same experience and kind of being like completely like eerie and weirded out by this strange looking dude. And I saw Jandek before I had heard the records, and it was just such a strange experience. So I think I was probably about like 14, 15 when I was seeing those, and I was just like, what the hell is this,
Definitely the iconography, the graphic content of it, especially when you see them all together,
right,
is very powerful, and a little menacing. I have a buddy, Jeff, who's a pretty heavy record collector, like pretty deep. And I remember he told me a story. He was at a record show. I think it was at a WFMU. This is
Yeah.
maybe like 10, 15 years ago. And Thurston was selling there. And, Jeff is like with it. And he was like, I looked through Thurston's boxes. I didn't know, I had no reference for any single record in there. I had no idea what any of these things were. And sort of from that time, he's like, I kind of have pieced some of it together. I kind of know what he was doing. But like Jandek records were the same way. It's like you have no reference point. Like
Yeah.
you know a thing or two about a thing or two, but you're like, I can't contextualize. I don't know what this is. Like
You don't have to make your own narrative with them. Because it's like, if you look at the cover of Modern Dances and Blue Corpse, you can tell it's on the same reel of film, but there's no backstory. I mean, for anyone who hasn't seen these, I'll show it. These are what all of these records look like. Is, track titles, P.O. box, and then some kind of Polaroid old shot. And that's it. And for years, I mean, did you ever, what I want to know is if you ever wrote to the P.O. box.
So I never wrote to the P.O. box. And in fact, I was very much a late Jandek convert. So with Sound Exchange, with the $1.99 copies, they eventually became, I remember there was a sign, it's like, spend $10, get a free Jandek record, and eventually they all disappeared.
Right.
So I actually came across, I took I had friends who were, I sort of like knew a little of the narrative, like, or, Jandek would be speaked of, but I hadn't like put my toe in the water yet.
Right.
So for me, the point where I actually jumped in was the Texas Monthly article. Yeah. So like I was like way later, versed in all these things, and somehow just I don't know. It's like, it was almost because I had grown up with this mentality that there wasn't scarcity or rarity in these things, that they must have no value.
Yeah.
I think that was definitely operating in the back of my mind. And then I read that article and was like, oh, like Kurt Cobain loves this dude. And I'm not a Nirvana guy or anything like that, but it still was like this little bit of vetting to be like, huh. And he's in the article, they also compared him to Daniel Johnston. I was a huge Daniel Johnston fan growing up. Also, he lived in Waller outside of Houston. So it was like, oh, this is, and that was sort of my like mental space going into it. It's like, oh, it's like Daniel Johnston, like, guy home recording with the guitar. Like, what could go wrong? Like, this is, and so I had a friend, this buddy, Eric Springer, and Eric was sort of my first serious record collector friend. He had the apartment filled, the floor to ceiling, wall to wall. And Eric had worked at a shop called Vinyl Edge in the late 80s, early 90s, which was way out in the suburbs. They were sort of like the Sound Exchange for the suburbs. Because, I mean, Houston is like, to drive from one end to the other, it takes 70 miles. So you have very disparate communities existing within the umbrella of Houston. So Eric Eric originally would loan me krautrock records, which he got all this crazy krautrock collection, all for $5 a piece, while working at Vinyl Edge. And at some point in our friendship, I was like, oh, I read this thing about Jandek, and he's like, oh, and Eric had them all. That was the other thing. It's like,
that was a full run, yeah.
He had a full run. I think he didn't have Ready for the House. That was like the one missing grail, of his Jandek collection. And when I say he had them all, I refer to all the vinyl releases.
Yeah, of course, up until, because what year did the Texas Monthly thing come out?
I want to say it was like 96, 97. Let's find out. We're going to do a little Google search here.
Because for those who don't know, Corwood stops doing vinyl after 12th Apostle, which is 93. So there's only 22 records that you can own on vinyl before it switches over. And
So the article came out in August 1999.
okay.
Yeah.
Is this the woman that said that she went drinking with Jandek and couldn't get any answers from him? Okay, yeah.
Sort of a watershed. So Eric's introduction, and once I sort of like I opened Pandora's box by even asking.
Right.
He was like, oh, like this is some deep arcana.
Yeah.
You know, like the sorcerer is about to, you know, teach me the real, you know, dark magic.
It really is the secret language.
The secret language. And Eric's first comment, and I sort of cycled back, I said this to you in passing before, it's like, Eric was like, all you need is all you need. And the one, like for Eric, he's like, I've had them all, listen to them all, I've had these for years. I'm in it and of it. And it is You Walk Alone. So You Walk Alone was the first Jandek record I was exposed to. I was actually telling a friend, because I was saying I'm going to do this podcast, and it's having to explain Jandek the other day. You Walk Alone is actually, and I'm embarrassed to say, it's the only one I still have filed also. So I put on You Walk Alone, like, this is Jandek. And what I realized in that moment, this is in a way the worst first Jandek record, because it really is kind of anomalous in its cohesion. Yeah. And it's like, I although it's a absolutely beautiful record and exists way more sort of in that in the collective narrative of like the Acid Archives private site, you know, world, it doesn't, I feel like, really represent what Jandek is all about.
It's definitely, I will say, for anyone looking to get into it, it's a really good record to look into as a starting point. Anything you hear after this, though, if you go in with this, will probably throw you off. The reason why I think I gravitated towards this record and why this made Jandek click for me was that there are points in this that are so close to like Velvet Underground bootleg recordings and just like kind of strange Acid Archives, as you said, like almost like like When the Telephone Melts almost sounds like it could be Daniel Johnston meets like Neil era On the Beach.
Yeah.
So it's this strangely accessible album, and there's been dispute over whether Jandek plays guitar on it at all, actually. And I don't know if you know about that.
I don't.
Supposedly, actually, we can't call him Jandek because that's apparently now that's the project for anyone who doesn't know.
Sterling. So
Sterling or the Rep. Apparently the Rep plays drums and sings on this record.
Yeah. And
there's a guy named Eugene who plays guitar. That's what the Seth Tissue site says.
Yeah.
I have no idea if that's true or not, but it's definitely very bizarre.
But it would make sense, sort of why this album is anomalous in its accessibility because of that you know, and I had I mean, there's so many tangents on this. I have theories. I have lots of Jandek theories. One of the theories I've kind of cycled through over the years. So supposedly Sterling, and I don't know. So
this is what I'm here for.
Yeah. When I got in the pool, it was at the time when Jandek still was operating as a recluse. No one knew anything.
There were no live shows yet or anything.
There were no live shows yet. Even like as the representative, it was unclear if, I mean, Sterling as the representative, it wasn't fully clear if the representative was in fact the gentleman photographed on the cover was in fact the musician. It was, you know, there was this gray area. I had a theory for a long time that Jandek was actually either Kurt or Kevin who worked at Sound Exchange. That it was like it was just too on the nose. Like
Yeah.
it was too informed to just be, you know, by chance, that just by happenstance this dude was like able to be so avant yet brilliant yet inept simultaneously, like, and have this ability to have a cohesion of vision. And so in that like original like version of speculation, there was a rumor which went around that once sort of we found out like Sterling was Jandek or the representative or whatever. There was a rumor that he was an original investor in Dave and Buster's, which is a like weekend and which started in Houston as a corporation. And it's Dave and Buster's. I don't know if they still exist or if they're a national thing still, but
It's a national thing.
it was like arcades and like beer and pizzas for like the dads and like bowling alley and like, you know, a fun palace essentially.
Yeah.
And that Sterling was able to fund these records by being this, you know, original investor in Dave and Buster's, and now he's made it. But what I've always wondered, trying to understand, so let's assume that this is like a totally, you know, like not informed human being. Like this is just like Joe average off the street. I think there's, I don't know if it's in the Texas Monthly article or in another interview where he's asked about musical influences, and he's like, I love Boston. You know, I was like, I love like this like really super mainstream, you know, FM rock. So it's like somehow liking Boston comes across
to this.
Yeah, it comes across like this, and it's like, okay, let's just assume that's the case.
Right.
I've wondered if Sterling, that the project wasn't like someone who was going through some sort of addiction recovery type scenario, perhaps like alcoholism or something like that, and it was the advice of the therapist to be like, you need to really, you know, put yourself into something, you know, to find an outlet so that you don't, you know, keep drinking or doing whatever. And that there is a certain obsessive compulsive nature to all the records looking and sort of sounding the same, you know, with a few exceptions. It's like, this is like some sort of AA recovery project, was one of my early assessments. And then so it's like, from that, where does Eugene come from? Where does
Nancy come from?
Where does Nancy come from? You know, it's like, and we're so in my like mental narrative of this like AA recovery project, these are like AA people. And he's like, oh, like I play music. Oh, you play music also? I'm a blues musician. We should jam together. And then like, especially in like, I mentally contextualize it in that Houston of 87, 88 with the Westheimer, you know, drag party scene, white boy funk thing. It's like Eugene's coming in expecting it to be like some SRV, you know,
right,
jam, and it's like, what the fuck? What have I gotten myself into? You know, and luckily Sterling's always recording, so it's like it was magically captured for all time. But yeah, I often wonder about the weird bait and switch.
I'm sure you remember the rumor that is similar to the therapist thing. That was that before he started playing live shows, their biggest rumor was that they were all recorded in one like creative burst, and once all of them came out, that was it, and it was just finished.
Yeah.
As advised by his therapist, you know.
Likewise, I've always liked the notion that So I've always been a fan of the notion that, you know, the person on the cover is not the person making the music, and that it's like it was like a found, like, you know, a photo album found object thing,
Right.
which then has been like, and we're mentally going, well, this must be the guy. Like he's on all the covers. It must be him. And it's like, no, not necessarily. That is a, like, you know, logical jump of the mind to put, you know, two and two together to equate to one thing. So then we have this huge paradigm shift occur, which is Sterling plays out, changes the game, changes the narrative. Now we actually have this person who is photographed performing this music. I still speculate, bear with me, that the person playing is just someone who looks like this guy, who is not actually the person on the record. It's pretty easy to emulate the Jandek sound, you know, and also the spattering of shows, performances have been all over the place. I've seen four Jandek performances. The first one was the infamous very first, so he had played externally before he ever played in Houston. And I went to the first Houston show, and what Jandek presented to the crowd, there's YouTube footage of this.
Let me stop. Is this the Rudyard show?
This is the record show, yeah. The show which lives in infamy. He presents, and this kind of goes back to why I kind of wanted to like contextualize.
Precisely. Yep.
Houston. So also in Houston, there was a weekly performance in downtown called Party on the Plaza, and it's I can't remember the name of the neighborhood in the downtown area, but the old quarter where Towns Live at the Old Quarter is recorded looks at that square, which is where Party on the Plaza is held. Party on the Plaza is long-standing, like, you know, several decades. Every Thursday night, I saw Iron Butterfly play there, like, for example, in, like, you know, 2002. It was horrendous. It was horrendously amazing. But like generally, Party on the Plaza was like the white boy blues hammer, like coming down, or like the white boy funk, like Margarita Moms, you know.
It's like the scene right out of Ghost World then.
Basically.
Okay.
And it's also, I guess it's also important to note that Houston as a city is really interesting because it's always been like 5 to 10 years behind the curve of popular music or popular culture. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of like the where late era capitalism funnels into. It's, you know, the third, in Chicago and Houston go back and forth on size. I like to refer to Houston as the third largest city in the U.S., but it's really kind of culturally devoid. It's really just like it's looking elsewhere, you know, for one, in condescending to inform Houston on what's hip or cool. But like it's already once Houston's doing something, it's already happened. It's like it's gone, you know. So it's like this Party on the Plaza then is like the pinnacle point of all of that, you know, 10 years too late cultural refuse funneling into music and giving it forth as like the voice of Houston.
Of course. So
that the very first show Jandek plays in Houston, where you know where he's from or lives, he presents White Boy Funk. He presents a performance completely at odds with everything on record
for about 3 hours. Also, yeah,
he gives Houston. He like that is Houston. He literally gives Houston. It is a brilliant moment. I mean, the show is, I thought, horrendous, but it was like it's sort of this like meta awareness, which also amazingly works on both levels, where it's like, is this a like tongue-in-cheek slight, or is this like just really a naivete of like, this is what y'all like, right? Like, I'm giving you what you want, you know.
What we've talked about is that, and I think that I've talked to you about this, and you're like, I really do think that he knew exactly what he was doing for decades.
Yes.
Still continues to. But I mean, like, that show was the 100th release on Corwood. That was the release this year, and there's a DVD pro shot of it, which I have to send to you. So that makes me so happy that you were at that show, because I was like, it really is infamous. Like,
yeah.
Anytime you show someone that footage that has no context of Jandek, they're just like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah. And so the next show I saw was I can't remember the name of the location, sort of an artist place in downtown Houston.
Mm-hmm.
And he did a chamber orchestra show.
Oh.
So it's like I see White Boy Funk, Jandek. I then see instrumental chamber orchestra, Jandek. Mind blown. But the chamber orchestra show is really interesting because there was like a bird flu thing going around, like a proto pandemic fear.
Yeah. This was like 2013, right?
That's something around there, yeah. And so it's like it was such an ominous performance. Everyone was sort of holding their breath because of this like pending doom. Mm-hmm. And he then gives this show, which absolutely encapsulated that, like, you know, embracing of mortality. Super intense, but also like an idiot, like a little too nuanced for an idiot savant, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And third time, and then finally I got to see an actual Jandek show. He played in the park at the Menil, which is in the center of Houston. And he just did acoustic Jandek, and it was like, okay, yeah.
Oh, so it was just solo.
Yeah. Great show. What's interesting though is that once we had confirmation of Sterling and of Jandek and Sterling and the rep all being the person, and awareness of what he looked like at the time, it's like he walked among us the whole time. So that was the thing. Like once it was like, oh, that's Jandek. He was a regular at the Whole Foods on Shepherd. He was there twice a week. Yeah. You know, like, oh, the weird guy in the black fucking hat was Jandek the whole time. It's like, oh shit, like, okay, like he just literally was here.
Yeah.
And so one of the other like interesting tangents on that, like him always being there, was where Jandek's, so once sort of Jandek was figured out, and actually there's a woman who is the twin of a woman who dated a friend of mine. She dated Jandek for a while, and once she was dating Jandek, we then were like, it was made, because you know we're all kind of curious about like this mystery. We found out where Jandek lived, and what's very interesting is that Jandek lives literally a block away from Frank Davis, who was the engineer for the 13-foot elevators. He was the house engineer for International Artists. Yeah. Also was best BFFs with Mayo Thompson, plays on Corky Set to his father. Sort of a pivotal Houston, really good friends, roommates with Townes Van Zandt in the 70s, like, you know, buddies with Guy Clark, hanging out with Lightning Hopkins, like this pivotal Houston figure who's also like kind of on like that cutting edge of the avant psych thing, which shaped sort of Texas music in a way, lives one block from Jandek. More so does like, which is like, wait a second. They also lived in a weird cul-de-sac area which butted up against the bayou. I have never known anyone else to live in that weird neighborhood, and it's a very marginalized, like run-down little sleepy pocket. And it was just like one of those like, hold the phone. Like these two really pivotal avant Houston figures
live right
one block apart. Like, wait whoa. Like there's like some sort of energy vortex.
If you look up Corwood Industries now, there's a photo of the house. It gives you the exact address. So at this point in time, it's almost like it's this strange thing. If it's you can't tell when he's fucking with you or not. With the whole like that goes back to the interview where he says like I like Boston.
So there was definitely something. So when I first like started listening to the Jandek records, it was just absolutely otherworldly. And I was kind of versed in weird music, and yet still it was so absolutely otherworldly.
Yeah.
It was difficult for me to contextualize, what's the reference point? And at some point, like several years in, I was listening to like a folk blues record, and it was like, oh, he's like literally tapping into this like Texas folk blues tradition.
Yeah.
Lomax also being from Houston. It's like there's all this stuff kind of bubbling where it's like, oh, like if you're, it's like it was like it's all very informed. It's all very like with it. There's something about the first record, like the Units record.
Yes.
The artwork is very much on point for the color, the sepia coloring of, or the whatever it's called when they paint over the negative. It's really on point for culturally something which was edgy and kind of punk, for lack of a like punk new wave, for lack of a better term, alternative or whatever. It's kind of like on point. Calling your weird loner solo act with an acoustic guitar, giving it a band moniker, the Units, also very much on point, where it's like, this dude is like a little more dialed in than just listening to Boston.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's more to the story here. And then to sort of like, and also like if you look at like the cover, like but it's 6 and 6 is the second record.
Yeah.
The black and white photo booth nature of that cover very much is like a wink nod like a Robert Johnson or something like that. It's
he definitely looks like, with how he's dressed too in that photo with the leather jacket and the pins, he definitely looks like someone you would have seen at a Big Boy show or like at a Dick's show back then. So it's like, where's the context? I think the thing that interests me so much when I got into these records, with at least with other kind of, I won't use the term lo-fi because it's so much at this point, but at least with artists like Fred Frith and like Daniel Johnston and all that stuff, there is context, there is backstory to these people making this music. With this, you're just thrown into this world of almost like people, I remember doing reviews saying like, may he never tune his guitar. Obviously the guy knows how to tune his guitar, it's not like, but even in the Jandek on Corwood thing, is I forget who says it, but it says like, imagine when you pick up a guitar for the first time when you're young and you don't really know what you're doing yet, but you just kind of start hitting strings rhythmically and you're like, that sounds good. And then you start reciting the blues from, off the top of your head. That's, what Jandek sounds like. And I was like, that's interesting, because as it goes forward, there's an early period, there's a middle period, and then there's a later period with this stuff. The middle period, I think, is my favorite stuff, and I imagine yours too, is records like this, You Walk Alone, On the Way. There's another one here, One Foot in the North, kind of these electric albums. Yeah. That the early period is always like singular, like it almost sounds like, for me, someone's sitting in an apartment that has, and it's one room, it has a bed, one of those swinging light bulbs from like the 60s, and a desk, and that's it.
Yeah. What also like, but I can never tell, it's like, are the walls the bare wood, or is there what is it called, wallpaper, you know, like
Yeah.
peeling wallpaper over it, you know, you can't tell. But one of the, and you talked about this earlier, as my background shows, there is something about these houses in this part of Texas which have a very uniform look. And part of the, like, I often cite that like Jandek is this, like, having grown up in Houston, Jandek is the sound of Houston. It like it encapsulates the thickness of the humidity in the air just hanging there. It's like, it's, you know, heavy air, like, you know, the dead or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like literally captured. But also I mentally could see that, I can see that room because I've been in that room, you know, so I know what that room looks like in a Houston house where this, you know, dude is just like banging away into the middle of the night, you know, with nothing to do. There's also really interesting, this came up in the script stuff I was working on, because I was doing a period piece based in '87 in Houston, right? So it's like I was kind of trying to like reference back to what was going on at that point in time. And in the pre-cable days of television, after your like 10 o'clock news came on, you know, you would get the TV sign off. You would get this like, and that is ends our broadcasting day,
right?
And it would just go to snow. You know, there's also like sort of pre infomercials, because then they eventually like go, oh, we can run this, you know, late night infomercial stuff content instead of just going to snow. So thinking about that, you have this like this time where the Jandek records were definitely not recorded at 2 p.m. You know, it's like they emulate the late night, like, you know, kind of loner, you know, din, you know. So it's like, these are late night records. Like, the TV has gone off the air. There's nothing to engage with. That just like it's the cold dark night, you know, it's just banging away, you know. I've also sort of referenced that I wonder, because there was a totally different tangent of music stuff, but like all the weird lounge records, right? And you had this whole lounge thing happening because the TV at 10:30, the TV went off the air, and you have all these, you know, non-hip people looking for something to do. So they're going out into the world, and, you know, like, oh, there's like the Holiday Inn down the road, like they got a bar, get a drink, and, you know, maybe there's a band playing. Sort of as a similar sort of, what do you do when the TV's off? What do you do? You know, not everyone had a beta machine at that point in time, or VHS or whatever. It's like there was limited resources for entertainment, and you had to really create your own thing. And if you're this weird kind of loner guy, like, that's banging the guitar endlessly, one record after another, after another, after another, after another. Everything's first take.
What I wonder is what happened in the lost years in between 79 and 81. Because those who don't know, Ready for the House comes out in 78. And I think Milstein's review of it is in 1980, maybe 79, and op. And how that record got around was, I think Sterling sent him like a box of at least 100 copies of it. And he talks about that in the documentary. He said those were really hard to give away. Like those are really hard to sell off. And he really loved it and gave it this big review. And I remember there's the note that gets shown in that documentary of Sterling thanking him, basically saying, you encouraged me to keep going. But it makes you wonder, like, what the fuck was he doing in between that string of time? Is there a lost record? Is he just like working as a machinist? Was he ever working as a machinist? You know, it's like,
I mean, my take is he was in art school. I still stand by. There's just something about the whole Jandek thing which just feels a little art school to me. You know, it's like, you know, was the Units record his senior project? You know, and then it's like,
it makes you wonder, because it's like, he's 74 now, so he did that record in late 20s, early 30s then, I guess. But is it recorded then?
Oh, that's a great point.
You know,
That
it's
is
like,
a great point.
because there's all those young photos of him. 6 and 6, he's young. Later on, he looks young. It makes you wonder, were these records really, were they released years and years after they were recorded? Or did he start working under the Jandek project when he was in his 30s?
Yeah.
It's really strange.
It would also account, I mean, if they were recorded earlier, it would also sort of account for some of the fidelity. And sort of the off-the-shelf home recording options at that point in time were much, pre-78 were much more limited.
Yeah. Because the panning is exactly like a 60s record with most of the early records, all the vocals on the left, all the guitar on the right. And
which is also indicative of the way the TIAC 2340s and 3340s operated as the quad machines.
Yeah.
At two overdub or the line-ins were all assigned stereo-wise. So you had 2 ins and they weren't mono-summed in any way. It was like a left in and a right in. So that would also account for that hard pan, that 2 microphones, and that's plug right in, no mixer. Like I got this machine,
because with a record like Telegraph Melts, it almost sounds like, oh, we don't have enough to put this guitar on its own channel, so let's just hang the mic. Because that guitar sounds so distant.
Yeah.
And so grainy.
I definitely lean to the side there. Besides the artistic aesthetic and the ability to stay on topic in this weird, obsessive way, I don't think anything was on purpose. I think it was literally just capturing a moment, a feel, literally off the top of your head. But then, like I said, these later shows make me question that, which is sort of the beauty of the Jandek experience, is that like, what are you doing? Like, what, is this intentional or not? Speaking of the Units record, there's, to my knowledge, only been 1 copy which is turned up in Houston proper. I know in the documentary, might be Byron talking about Christina of the Shalarmities staying with them, and I think he offered her, like, you can have any record you want in the house, and she's like, the only record I want is the Units record. I've never, I've worked in a record store in Houston for 15 years. She currently works at the Waterloo Pier. Like, she's like a lifelong record store employee, like dialed in, like, but she had never come across a copy of the Units record. So the 1 copy which did turn up in Houston was my buddy Jeff, who there's a warehouse in Houston where, like, once a month or once every 2 months, the dude opens up the warehouse. He's like a kind of record hoarder, junker, dealer guy.
Right.
And you come in and pick everything. And the guy the guy who ran the warehouse had gotten a huge gospel collection from a local Houston gospel station. Within that collection was a copy of the Units Ready for the House.
That's fantastic.
Jandek clearly had sent a copy to the radio, like not realizing it's like a black gospel radio station, or maybe realizing it's being like, oh, you'll dig what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Sent them a copy. Interestingly though, that was in the morning. That evening, Jeff was playing a show at this arts house thing called the Joanna Collective in Houston.
This story's great.
Jandek showed up to the show, and my partner and I were operating the door at the time, and it was a $5 cover, and the man in black walks up wearing the hat, and I was of the assumption that, like, it's Jandek, he gets in for free. My partner was like, no, like, it's $5. And he just, kind of stood there, like, taken back in silence, But it was interesting because it was this gravitas of personality, like, don't you know, without saying a word, don't you know who I am? You know, and she's like, no, $5.
Oof.
And there was silence, and they kind of stared each other down. And he crumbled. He gave her $5. He goes in. Halfway through the first song, Jandek left. He was like, yeah, no, I'm out.
The rep has left the building.
The rep has left the building, but it was very serendipitous. It's like, holy shit, Jeff found a Units record in the morning. He's playing a solo acoustic show that evening, and Jandek shows up. It's like this weird sort of like oh, like these are incantations. They will, you listen to him enough, he will Bloody Mary 3 times in the mirror, and Jandek will show up at your house. Like, be careful what you're opening here.
It's interesting, people, and I don't even know if I should be saying this or not, it's not really debunking a myth, but they are in the phone book. But if you email them, they still check the PO box and stuff. You call them, there's a good chance they will get back to you about an inquiry. And the coordinator is very, very easy to talk to, very pleasant to talk to.
Is it a man or a woman who is the coordinator?
I will tell you, it's a woman, and you can clock her on the live albums.
Okay.
That's all I'm going to say on the show.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the one thing about doing this, is that I don't want to debunk the myth, for
Right.
Yeah, that's what's tough talking about it. It's almost like I try and catch myself when I stay Sterling, because I was like, well, anyone who's looked in knows. But I've been told that friends and family call him the rep.
Okay, my bad.
So I still have to catch myself, because I say Jandek. It's strange, because I think the live shows was, at least when I would say that it was revealed that Jandek was not a man, but a project.
Okay.
I would say, because what's interesting about it is that supposedly the people that play on those records, and I don't know, apparently Nancy has a sister named Pat.
Okay.
And she sings on Somebody in the Snow.
Okay.
Other than that, he said, people would just drop by the house. And then that John Truby interview, he kind of says, like, can you give me their names? He says, like, they have nicknames. And there's a long 1 minute pause. And then he kind of goes up to this long minute where it sounds like someone would have, like, hung up almost. Yeah. You hear John Truby go, you there? And he goes, yeah, I'm not sure if I should. I'm not sure if I should tell you that. And then there's like the next question, and that's actually how the movie Jandek and Corwood ends. What we do know about, and then we'll get into some of the tracks on this record, I guess.
Yeah.
But what we do know about the man is, if you go through these records, there are. At first, you're probably drawn to the strange, almost like microtonal sounding thing more than the lyrics themselves. There are clues that he's a normal dude. Like Point Judith is a place you can go to in Rhode Island.
Yeah.
There's the whole thing is that we talked about earlier, the idea of Jandek outtakes, which is hilarious to me. But European Jewel has been recorded, I think, at least 7 different times. So the first appearance of it is the final track on Ready for the House. It shows up again on Chair Beside a Window. And then almost all of the first side of The Rocks Crumble are 3 different recordings of that song, not separated, in a row.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, out of all the songs, like, is this the magnum opus for you? Like, was it just like, I have to get this one right? It's almost like, what is the motive behind European Jewel?
But also, so my take, it's always been that these tracks were like, just like flung off, like just like scattershot throwing shit at the wall, see what sticks.
Yeah.
That then it's sort of like, talking about like Trout Mask Replica or something like that, where it's like your first impression is like, these dudes are fucking off, like
yeah, exactly.
And then to find out, like, no, like literally like every fucking nuanced measure and bar is like intentional and done on purpose. I still say they're fucking off, but it's like, I've heard outtakes where it's like, oh shit, like my brain.
Yeah.
And it's Jandek doing the same. He's tipping the hat to be like, like this is, like how many takes, it's like, are there 47 takes of The Cat Who Walked to Shelbyville? It's like,
there is. Okay, so I forgot. Follow Your Footsteps comes before this. That song is a reprise with almost the exact same lyrics from the song For Today.
Yeah.
On that record. I didn't clock that until recently, because that's another favorite of mine. That's another electric album that's like, well, some of it's electric. It's very, very easily accessible, I would say.
There's an interest, like, in talking about the project of Jandek in these like acoustic electric eras is such an like Dylan homage. It's like a dude who's just listening to Boston is not gonna like be so dialed in to be like, here's my electric period, like
here's my blonde on blonde.
I see what you did there,
What do you think Jandek's blonde on blonde is, per se?
Oh, well, and actually that's a great question and take, and it's also very interesting. Jandek never did a double album.
I know,
format. It seems like a very missed opportunity, and I have. Maybe that'll be a follow-up podcast, because I need to go back and reassess some of these records. It's been long enough that I've stepped away to clear my psyche to be able to dive back into the pool.
You were the house guest for this podcast, so anyone that you want to claim, just let me know. The goal at the end of this podcast is to eventually get the rep to come on and just be like, whatever the hell you want to talk about, we'll talk. We don't have to even talk about anything to do with Jandek. It's like the cover of the Jandek on Corwood thing is a letter when they tried to write him that were like all these questions. He just simply wrote back, you might not get all the answers you want, ... It's better that way.
It is better that way.
It really is.
I mean, in a lot of ways, I felt so cheated by Jandek revealing, that there was the gravitas of this dude consistently making this body of work and never revealing himself. Which Howard Hughes is also buried in Houston. Yeah. And it like, is Jandek Howard Hughes? Because like also like or what's the guy who wrote the book who like, disappeared, Thomas Pinchot or whatever. Yeah. Like, is Jandek, that there was also a brief moment where it's like, is Jandek Billy Gibbons? Like is this like
amazing? The same guy who wrote Tush wrote, like The Cat That Walked from Shelbyville.
But also, it's like on that, like let's point this out a little bit. Every interview with Billy ever, also from Houston, I think everyone knows that, right? Every interview with Billy ever, like Billy is he's a tall tale teller. He'll never give you the fucking truth ever.
Billy Gibbons, really quick for anyone who's lived under a rock for the past fucking century, is obviously the singer guitarist for ZZ Top. Just for anyone who is unaware. So
or ZZ Top if you're in Canada.
ZZ, yeah. So go on. It was interviewing with Billy. It's true. You never get. It's always kind of derailed, like from the subject entirely.
Which the representative also seems to do. It's very very similar approach to dissemination of information. And don't let never let the truth get in the way of a good story. It's like I definitely believe in that. But yeah, I was sort of gutted when he came out. It sort of it seemed to cheapen it in a way.
Mhm.
But yet now we're like almost like 15 years since that point.
2004, I believe, was Glasgow. Yeah.
Yeah, so 16 years from that point. He's done a very good job of maintaining the anonymity, even though we now have this like face and presence
Yes.
who's at Whole Foods right now buying some like kombucha and organic
Fresh
Amazon grape.
vegetables. Yeah.
Yeah. So interesting, fascinating. It's like, and maybe there's also like something to that it's like, to circle back to, this is too well informed. I do have a couple friends who have approached him, and he won't say shit. That he stonewalls you.
I know that he's a very nice dude, but if you try and ask him anything about the project, he will basically be like, listen to the records and you'll find what you're looking for.
Yeah. Because if you piece all the covers together, it's the map to Narnia, and
Oh, I thought you had the book. I've seen one person that has the book that's like every album cover. It's this weird hardcover. I saw it on eBay once.
No, I'm pulling up the review of the Units record in the Acid Archives.
Oh, right.
Because I always found this review to be a little bit telling. And when I first got a copy of this, this was the first review I looked up, and was kind of confused, because as I was introduced to sort of the world of the private press, I didn't know what that terminology was.
Mm-hmm.
And when it was explained to me, it's like, oh, you mean like Jandek records,
right?
And so I got a copy of the book, and the first thing I did was like, let's see what they have to say about Jandek records. And let's see if I can find it here. So there are two reviews, one by Aaron Molensky and the other by Patrick Lundberg.
Okay.
I'll just read snippets. We'll start out with Aaron's review. If this is the first artist you've looked up, you're reading the wrong book. Obviously, opinions vary about the enjoyability, not to mention the purpose, of Jandek's music. While I've always believed that he was way more interesting to read about than to listen to, unquestionably his music makes more sense over his entire oeuvre than on just one record. Blah, 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 blah. And then Patrick's review, the notorious cult artist of the outsider fringe type, his 24 albums are popular topics for discussion. Most of it falls outside of the scope of the Acid Archives on the grounds of it not being psychedelic in any way. And then it continues to sort of actually talk about, moody, blah, 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 blah. But I always sort of took that, like, it didn't get the stamp of approval.
Yeah.
Likewise, Chrome doesn't get the stamp of approval, besides those first two records, like fully being like 75 and like 76, like private press, like, San Francisco psych weirdos, doesn't get inclusion because of everything which followed. Jandek also doesn't get inclusion, and I haven't read that in years, but sort of rereading it, my original impression of what those reviews were suggesting, and maybe this is me reading into it or wanting it to suggest that, is that this isn't authentic. This is a facsimile of what the private press is. It's somehow too informed, too arty, too just like, ersatz,
Right.
And yet, like, how many decades now, it's like, it's not, it's the real fucking deal. Even, and that sort of thing, it's like, even if there is like an intentionality of presentation to make it this arty thing, there's too much authenticity, which actually, if you actually listen to the music itself and spend time with it, there is a there, which like somehow backs it up. Like, even if this is like a character, a persona, there's still somewhere lurking in that artist these feelings, these dark thoughts. So
especially with a record like Blue Corpse, you get this very melancholy approach, which is very strange to get after a record like Modern Dances, which is almost, if you play someone who doesn't really have context, Modern Dances, they just be like, well, what the fuck? That's why with a lot of these records, I don't think it's very, I would find it very difficult to dabble in Jandek, I guess.
Yeah, you're in or you're out. There's no middle ground.
Because once you're in, like a song like You Painted Your Teeth, at least for me, is actually fucking hilarious.
Yeah.
And I think that he really is trying to be funny on a track like that.
There's another character in the Houston avant-garde who I did speculate for a while potentially was Jandek, and there was some potential for this. And that's the character of Mark Flood. Mark played in Culture Side in the early 80s. And Mark has also released some very off-color 45s, which are so Jandek-like. Mark is also currently basically a world-renowned professional artist. His lace paintings sell for millions of dollars. He has and if you sort of if you look at the Units record and you look at where Mark was at that point in time, it's like that was kind of his aesthetic. And this is like a art school guy, very much in it's like he has the vision to be able to pull off the mono approach of what the Jandek catalog looks like, and he has the finances to do it. He has the resources, the time, the know-how, the vision, and like aesthetically, kind of like if and Mark has also been known to take on several pseudonyms and nom de plumes and personalities. I could very well see Mark being the mastermind pulling the string behind what we perceive as the Jandek project.
Right.
So
it's very strange. This was one someone put to me that I didn't really think about this. My friend Rosie, when I was getting into this stuff, described it as like, do you know about liminal space? And I didn't.
I'm not familiar there.
Liminal space is, really quick, you also, but anyone who's listening, just do a Google search for liminal space really quick and take a look at that image. It is, it's basically,
it's like I'm getting a very David Lynch vibe.
Yes, it's like a disorientation in between period. And I guess it has something to do with like anthropology or whatever. But yeah, it's like a middle period and a rite of passage for a particular space or something. If you look up a liminal space image, you'll instantly be like, oh, yeah, Ready for the House. But Ready for the House was decades before that became like a thing on the internet or anything. Before that became like a trend or whatever. So how she described it is this, and she said like, Ready for the House almost seems kind of like the audible equivalent of liminal space. This kind of thing that's halfway in between somewhere, and it's almost eerie. It's like the equivalent of like a old school building with all the stuff still in it, all the chairs still in it, nothing touched, but no one's in it.
One of the things which I sort of listening to You Walk Alone again this morning, what hits me every time is the with the electric guitar, the reverb on the electric guitar, and sort of the overall fidelity, this record sounds so much like the first self-titled Royal Trucks record on Royal Records. Like as far as like just the actual tonality, it's like
absolutely
that sounds like Neil. Like whoa, okay, like was this an influence on them also? You know?
Yeah,
Wonder.
it's one of the, we talked about when I started getting into this stuff. I wrote you and I was like, all of the early truck stuff now makes more sense than ever to me, because that guitar playing mixed with whatever it is, Beefheart or Neil Young or whatever else they were into, you instantly notice as soon as this record hits the needle. Interestingly enough, too, I believe the first Trucks record comes out the same year or a year after it comes out, right?
Yeah, same year. Yeah.
Yep. And you can totally hear that guitar playing on stuff like Strawberry Soda, like just kind of perfectly out of tune, but knowing that you are. And the same kind of reverb, trebly guitar tone.
Yeah.
Is so all over that first Trucks record. And even at points, kind of how he delivers the vocals sounds kind of different than how he normally will kind of deliver them in this ghostly way. They're a little more they're a little more forefront. Like you can tell, like, oh, he does know how to hit notes. He just chooses to deliver them in this weird way, I guess.
So following Lavender, we have Time and Space,
which might actually be my favorite Jandek song.
I mean, it's solid. It's like 6 minutes long, 7 minutes long. Also,
7 minutes long, yeah.
Yeah, it's like and yet it doesn't wear like other. There are some other Jandek songs where 7 minutes is a endurance test.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, Time and Space, you're there. I mean, the cohesion of the songwriting and to the potential that maybe Eugene is the driving force of that cohesion, you know, makes a little more sense. But
if you are Eugene, please, you know, out yourself. So
call in.
We can say thank you. Yeah, it's a song that's, I mean, it's so based around that kind of like 2 12-bar blues chords that you'd think it would wear after 7 minutes, but it's all the lead going on behind it. It's actually very straight ahead. The drums don't go out of time on purpose or anything. It's not very off kilter. It's still left field, but it's definitely closer to like a song like that follows a record about 3 years later, that song Upon the Grandeur on One Foot in the North. That's another, I feel like that's him kind of pushing almost more kind of straightforward stuff while still staying true to the Jandek thing.
I mean, the title Time and Space also to that liminal space. It's like, I mean, he spelling it out. I mean,
there are clues. Yeah. I mean, there's tons of clues scattered throughout these records. Time and Space also shows up in a movie, I found out.
Oh, what movie?
Calvin Marshall, a hit comedy about losing. I don't know. It shows up in some scene. I watched it. Whole thing's free on YouTube. It didn't look very good. But I skipped throughout that movie to try and find where that is. And it's a scene where this guy's really loaded in a bar and keeps demanding whiskey, and they kick him out and they're throwing him out, like holding him by his hands and legs. They throw him out of a building, and that's on the jukebox. And I'm like, wow, what fucking jukebox is this that you have? You walk alone. Like, I would go there every day. You know? Christ.
So there in Houston, there's a Mexican restaurant called Chapultepec, and back in the mid '90s, there was some cool dudes who played in bands had a bar next door called Escondido, and Chapultepec's open all night.
Right.
At some point, they went over there and loaded the jukebox. So there's like Slint Spiderland on the jukebox, this like, you know, taqueria, late night taqueria. and they kind of fucked up because they should have put a Jandek CD on there. There might even be. I never like.
Ready for the House being on a jukebox. Third track's really good.
Yes, The Cat That Walked from Shelbyville.
And we see this. I would like to just ask the question here: if anyone has worked for The Simpsons or knows if this title had any influence on Matt Groening naming the rival town in The Simpsons Shelbyville, I would like to know. I asked you this last night, and I think the only person that I would know that would have any contact with Groening would maybe be Byron. But he does. I know that he was a big fan of The Residents. So for a Jandek reference to make its way into The Simpsons would not surprise me.
There is also, I'm assuming that the title of this song is referring to Shelbyville, Texas, which is on the border to Louisiana. Sort of it's just outside of Uncertain, like sort of north of there. But one of the things which has always struck me about the title of this song in particular, or like what it really like resonates with, is a John Fahey title. Like this is like, this could literally be like, I can like the super long, narrative. It just reeks of a Faheyism, in that sort of like awareness,
That comes back to that letter too that he talks about in some interview where he says like, do you know John Fahey? And the guy's like, yeah, of course, you must be a fan of him. He's like, I don't really know who he is. I listen to some of his music, it's fine. Like he sent me a letter like saying that he really liked my music back in like the late 80s or whatever.
Well, it's interesting, like, just to circle back to the Frank Davis connection, or living a block away.
Yeah.
The Red Crayola were friends with Fahey. They played with Fahey. Apparently there's an unreleased double LP they recorded with John Fahey in like 68 or 67 or something like that. So there's like, just, if you kind of look at like Mayo Thompson's direction also, there's I've always felt an affinity as far as the vibe of Jandek records with Corky's Debt. Like that's also a Houston record. It's like that same kind of like saddest dude at the carnival vibe, which like exudes out of both.
Yeah.
That, and in 78, 79, the direction which Mayo had gone in being associated with Rough Trade and like recording like the Fall record and stuff like that, that whole aesthetic also is very much aligned with sort of the way that first Units record presents. You know, that it's like, I've often wondered if a younger Jandek wasn't sort of in like and potentially pre these records in his college days, wasn't like hanging with that scene. It's all there's something it's like there's something in the Wellwater that like everything else in Houston at that time like has like it's not like, oh, this is what like the Houston thing was. It wasn't, it's like it like, I mean, Houston was straight ZZ Top and crushing beers and, like party at the Moon Tower. And that's the artiness which Mayo Thompson's crew was exuding, which Jandek also exudes. It's like that they're in the same town, that it's like, I wonder if they weren't all kind of like minds, at the coffee shop,
Were they? I mean, it makes you wonder, like, when they were like kids growing up, like, was that their upbringing? Like, were the Beatles like a big deal for them?
Yeah, huge.
It's like,
huge.
There
was. I remember talking to Frank one day about why Frank stopped playing music in the mid '60s, and
Ended up kind of coming back to it later and just did pretty straight like blues covers and stuff like that. Sort of why he stopped playing music, you know, because he was so, you know, tapped in, you know, like as an engineer, why was he not also, you know, like producing stuff? And his response was, I kept writing these songs, like, you know, these like pop songs, and they basically were just Beatles songs, like you know, and I didn't, you know, I could see at the time that it wasn't authentic or valid because I'm just doing Beatles songs, you know. I'm just like, this might be my song, but it's just a Beatles song. So it's like the it was very much there. The presence was there. But likewise, the influence, specifically Lightning Hopkins, in the Houston scene, was like, you kind of like, basically your first you know, shitty $6 Sears and Roebuck's guitar, you also got a free Lightning Hopkins record if you listen to Houston. It's sort of how it feels like everyone knew, you know, it was just part and parcel of the setting.
And that's why I ask with the Beatles thing, is that obviously that stuff was a big deal for those guys too, but for someone like Sterling, do you think that he was a kid that was playing like old 78s of this stuff? Like, do you think there were Skip James 78s like hanging around, like Delta blues stuff at all? Because there's definitely, you can hear some of that in his playing, especially those like 1939 Skip James sessions, certainly on a record like this. So it makes you wonder, like, were these guys also, you know, like big 78 children, you know?
That's a great perspective. Drumbo wrote it's interesting that Beefheart keeps coming up in this conversation.
Very natural. I've been listening to Beefheart all week too.
Yeah. So he wrote this biography, and what was really interesting about the biography and the way it was laid out, was he broke out sort of the magic bands into these different eras.
Okay.
And the way he contextualized all the players was based on their age, and what their age determined is what they were listening to coming up, which inspired the playing. So it's like, oh, at this certain point, we get this band, and like these dumb shits were all grown up listening to the Beatles. Here's this earlier version with like Ry Cooder and stuff like that, where it's like they're growing up listening to Skip James and, you know, like 78s and whatnot. So yeah, and if you look at like the Jandek aesthetic, it is very much, I mean, beyond like the music, it's like we can hear the blues influence, you know, or the rural folk blues influence present, but you look at the way they're presented visually. It is that 78.
Yeah.
But maybe it's also that could also be like hindsight being 2020, that the liminal space which they are existing in is the same as the ghost world of the atmosphere of, you know, 78 RPMs. And it's like, there's a mental correlation which might not actually be there, but I feel it. It's the same sentiment, and very, very possible. And bringing up the Beatles, it's like, it doesn't sound to me like Jandek has ever heard a Beatles record.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
It's not even one of those things where it seems like you've heard the Stones either. It feels like somehow you got from Skip James to Lou Reed like that, and we're just I don't know, Kinks. I've never heard of them, you know.
Or Skip James to Boston.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it makes you, I mean, like, I feel like if you went through his record collection, he probably would be a guy that would be like, have all this stuff and then be like, I don't really want to listen to that. Let's just listen to Tres Hombres. I feel like that might kind of be his thing. But
I mean, he loves the craft beers. It's like, maybe he's just like a straight beer garden fucking beer drinker, hellraiser, good old fucking Houston boy, you know? It's like,
he seems like a good time guy. But yeah, no, it kind of goes back to those covers too, is that when you do go through these things, they do totally look like almost records you would see like in your parents' basement or something, like almost like not quite Nancy Sinatra records, but how they're like, you know, how there's like a shot on the cover and then there's always the time lengths of each song. maybe sometimes there's like someone's put a check next to it for like, you know,
yeah.
They are such strange kind of like, I don't even know how to describe them, because it's like this font is I'm sure you remember these Chinese menus more than I do actually, but that the exact font of like every fucking like 80s 90s Chinese menu, like even into the early 2000s. So it's clear that he has some kind of humor hidden in there, but yeah, there's a couple of these where, and I don't know if it's on purpose, but there are at least 3 records in this electric period where the PO box numbering is completely wrong, and not by much. Instead of like 77220, it's like 770020 or something, like, and they're swapped slightly on those 3. So it's like it's almost like if you clock it, it's kind of like, oh, it's like that Royal Tenenbaum scene. It's like, I know you, asshole, you know. So yeah, it's especially with the, I mean, Cat That Walks in Shelbyville is, I'd say, before we move on to Quinn Boys, I'd say it's relaxing to me. I texted you about that song last night, and I was like, I forgot that the song's actually just fucking beautiful.
Sure.
It's very mellowed out.
Which is, I mean, the whole record is very mellowed out.
Mm-hmm.
Like for a Jandek project release, it's the claustrophobia is not as present.
Yes.
Because like some of the other earlier records, like the anxiety-inducing claustrophobia of them can be sort of intense.
You know what's a good sign here on the cover of this record too is that for once the shade is open on a Jandek record. So that's a good sign.
So Quinn Boys, back to
this song is Neil Haggerty all over before we get into it.
That's right where I was going with it.
Right down to that noise he makes multiple times throughout this album. Yeah. You go, oh, this whole record.
It's Yinjin, you know. It's but I know that sound, you know. Like
anyone who's listening to this, I implore you, go listen to the first 2 seconds of Yinjin versus Vomit Creeps on Twin Infinite. Or like look it up, and then if you listen to the song, it is the exact same vocal noise, like right down to it. I mean, chances of the comments in our future, if that isn't a direct nod to Sun Ra, I don't know what is. So it makes you wonder, like, are you taking a nod to this too? Like,
and they're on the first Royal Trux record. There's a track called "Touch," an instrumental kind of electronic piece, which is, and it has these sort of like, it's like chaotic noise which breaks into silence, and that is a direct nod to the Morton Spotnik piece "Touch," which does a similar thing. And that was when I pieced those two together. That was a sort of amazing, because to bring up the Trucks, which both of us are huge fans.
There it is for you.
Likewise, and I got into the Trucks very early on, and that was like just like a world of sound I had no context for. Also, like sort of Mojo magazine had this segment article back in the day called "Last Night a Record Saved My Life or Changed My Life," and it would be the first Royal Trux record for me, because that put me on the musical trajectory I am on now. Still, you know,
it's I mean, they are a gateway band.
Yeah.
I think for both you and me, absolutely. Trucks I discovered very young, and stuff that came after that, I would kind of be like, oh, okay, now I get where that's from and everything. It was a total gateway into pretty much all the music that I love and still continue to love to this day. So
and upon recognizing the Morton Subotnick Touch homage, that was such a very important moment, because it was like,
oh, you dudes are like record nerds. Like,
Yeah.
oh, like there is this isn't completely alien music because there's a context which this is coming out of. And if you can piece together the puzzle, like, you know, it makes sense. And Jandek's very much the same way. But there are these clues that this doesn't exist completely in a vacuum.
No.
There is an awareness. There is a like hipsterdom, but it's like it's not. It's like an authentic hipness.
Yeah.
You know, versus like, oh, like I'm totally ripping this thing off. It's like I'm taking all this information in. I mean, Jandek's like hella postmodern in that way, where it's like taking in all this information, recontextualizing it, giving forth this pastiche combined thing, which is also more than the parts which went into it, you know.
It's why it fits in with something like the Sun City Girls, and that the regurgitation of music, and that where you can tell these guys all listen to all sorts of stuff, and then we're like, well, how do we incorporate all of this into a melting pot of our own thing?
Which becomes our own thing. I was watching on YouTube last night. There's some really amazing canned heat television footage from the late '60s, and in one of it looked like it was like a Playboy After Dark like setup of the stage, but then Dick Clark's the interviewer, and in the conversation, they're talking about 78s, and all the dudes in canned heat were like sort of like mega Boussard style like 78 dudes. And, you know, the Bear's like, oh yeah, I have like 15,000 78s. And sort of the interviewer is like, wow. And he's like, yeah, but like also that dude's got 5,000 and that dude's got like, you know, a couple thousand killer things.
Yeah.
And of that eight, sort of to go back to this like magic band thing of like what they were referencing and listening to and how it shaped them. If you look at Jandek's age demographic, it's like, yeah, he, you know, maybe he was, you know, like in a previous era, the 78s were accessible and, you know, obtainable at junk stores, and like you can still find them. So that was why that's what he gravitated towards. But convoluted narrative here. But with canned heat, what they're doing, presenting, like they're listening to 78s and they're playing straight blues music where it's like, these dudes are listening to these 78s. Okay, I see what they're doing. It's a one for one, you know, equality, where Jandek's listening to the 78s potentially, most likely, and it's like it takes you a lot of fucking work to recognize that's the point of influence and inspiration, because it's something so much more. He's created more than the parts put in.
Yeah. Well, there's a comment on this record too. If you go, it's fun to scroll through Jandek comments on YouTube because they're fucking hilarious. Someone says about this, talking about, someone comments something about the Velvet Underground, or someone says, really? I always pictured him being in a house with a guitar, a chair, and a desk, and a scratched up copy of Pink Moon. It's like, interesting. I don't hear Pink Moon as much in this record, but I definitely hear it in like a record like Follow Your Footsteps or On the Way, I guess. But it is that thing. It's like, this almost sounds like you're listening to like a warped 60s record that you found in like a dollar bin with no context, and it's just a white label thing you put on.
The Nick Drake comparison though to Jandek is I've never made that one before, but there is a there is a meat to that, and maybe it's sort of the loner downer isolationism,
the melancholy dude.
Melancholy, yeah. Who are the Quinn boys?
They sound fucking smoking.
Is it a sequel or is it just another take, which is why it gets the two after it?
I think it's a sequel.
Okay.
It seems like it. I'd have to go. The original one's only like 2 minutes. And I think it is the exact same lyrics. It's like, you ever go down there and see the Quinn boys? When I walked out, I went, oh! but it's really weird. I like to imagine that the Quinn Boys are almost like kind of like a Royal Trucks-esque band playing in a bar in Houston with no air conditioning whatsoever, wearing like kind of the clothes that he has on the cover of this record, but like kind of more like 70s vintage out, just fucking rocking.
So that band existed in Houston.
The Quinn Boys.
No, they weren't called but they weren't called
Oh, okay.
But your description, I've seen that band existed. They were called the Cave Reverend. So there was a club in Houston called the Axiom. Before that, it was called Cabaret Voltaire, and it was sort of like a seminal Houston punk club.
Okay.
The Cave Reverend they were the in-between acts who would play in the front, like sort of lobby vestibule bar area.
Also, they're like the in-between house act almost.
House act, and like,
yeah.
you know, super junked out. Like, and my, you know, this would have been, you know, like late 80s. I saw them in like the early 90s, and they sort of like a thing
Yeah.
which no one really talked about. It sort of existed, and sort of my memory of them musically was something along the lines of like Merle Allen era Cheater Slicks or something like that. Probably nothing like that. They're probably playing like Stevie Ray Vaughan blues, but like I created them to be so much cooler than they were. But yeah, the Quinn Boy, they you know, maybe
so Reverend Gibbons might have been so Cave Reverend may very well have been the Quinn Boys in disguise.
Yeah. I mean, we don't know that those dudes' names weren't like Michael Quinn and Stephen Quinn, you know.
That's true.
Yeah. Man.
See, that's the stuff. Maybe we can ask, at this point enough time has passed, maybe we can ask who the Quinn Boys were.
Who were the Quinn Boys?
And he might go, "It's me."
So side 2 is where we're at now. Which opens with The Way You Act. I don't remember this song.
I listened to this record last night, and I seem to remember it's very mellowed out. Honestly, the opening of that sounds exactly like the guitar part that's playing on Cool Down Wills on Twin Infinitives. That like, it's like almost the same thing.
Yep.
So it's like, I forgot about that song. It sounds like taking a layer out of Twin Infinitives. And that's what that song is.
Or, how do we know? So, how do we know that Twin Infinitives doesn't actually possess a layer of Jandek?
Oh, good point. Wow.
Like, did Neil accidentally record over his Jandek tape, and just that one channel was
that's
still like
amazing. God, could you imagine if there's like
let's just pretend, that's
yeah.
We'll create an urban legend.
Makes me wonder if Haggerty would come on this show, if you would talk about Jandek.
Yeah, I would actually love to know how on the nose we might be with this, or it could just be like that was the zeitgeist of '88. You know, that's like somehow.
That was in the air of the underground at the time, I guess.
Yeah. Or maybe they both, you know, it's the same like Roland Cube amp they got at a pawn shop, which had, you know, it's like, that's why we're having this like, you know, sameness.
The amps on these records always, at least for Jandek, sound like taking a Fender, like practice amp. Like, I mean, I'll even show, there's one in my room. It sounds exactly like this.
Yeah.
One of these like frontman amps. Yeah. Like if you dial the reverb all the way up on it, just really kind of crappy practice amps, but they kind of give you this weird Velvet's tone if you fuck with them enough, I guess. But yeah, The Way You Act. I don't know. That's.
Is it the sleeper of the album? I mean, it's like I enjoyed it's like, but it doesn't stick. Like it's somehow just like.
I mean, you're gonna have to.
It's a dream remembered.
I listened to this record last night to prepare for this, and I can't remember how The Way You Act or I Know the Times Go.
Exactly.
But I can remember every note of When the Telephone Melts, because that's a fucking.
And that's,
you know,
so we're all just kind of beating around the bush here. Like, let's just get to it, right?
Yeah.
Which is track 3, side 2, 9 minutes and 9 seconds, When the Telephone Melts.
Those who want to know, I mean, this is the track on the album, in my opinion.
I say this is the Jandek track.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, you're not wrong.
Like every mixtape which gets a little taste of the project, which is the project. This is the track.
Yes.
It is a deep psych late night downer jam. I mean, it's like it's an undeniable track.
Yeah,
Telephone Melts is Jandek's Achilles' last stand.
Yes,
like
absolutely.
Yeah.
And
I always get it confused because there's also the track The Telegraph Melts, right?
That's the record, yeah. Telegraph Melts.
The LP title, yeah. So I'm always like, when the telegraph, telephone. I don't remember.
Do you have a garden like this?
Currently, no.
Have you ever had a garden like that in Houston?
No, but I could. What would be really interesting is just thought crossing the mind right now.
Yeah.
There are like those websites which have like scenes from movies, like the exploded map, like this like Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. This is where the radio station was, and the Jandek version. This is the flower bed on the cover of Telegraph Melts. This is.
Let me show you what totally got me the other night that Byron had to point out to me when we were talking about it. So this is where the narrative shit comes in with these records.
Yeah.
So there's Modern Dances, right?
Yeah.
And then there's that which he's looking at right there.
Yeah.
And that is Byron's like, yeah, that's just the garden from Telegraph Melts. And my brain like, it's like scanning it. Like, what? So I mean, that's the thing where the narrative comes in, because it's suddenly you're just like, it crosses over, like there's hidden details in this.
But and this is what always like I've made some musical releases.
Mm-hmm.
A year is a very long duration between, right? And in this, let's just look at this era here, the electric period.
Yeah.
It's over the course of what, like 5 years, like 4 to 5 years, like, and in that time, there is no derivation of the artist to be like, like we're in 85 and it's like, okay, yeah, this is the cover image, right? This is what we're going for. And then like we're in 89 or 88 and it's like, in that amount of time, be like, I'm looking at something presently. I want that to represent this record I've recorded.
Yeah.
No, it's like those photos are all from the same day, the same moment. And somehow he can like maintain the focus of that moment and like stretch it over years with no shift, which is also like to the conjecture that these were all recorded in one session.
Mm-hmm.
Was he only putting them out once a year because that's what the the trust dividends of his Dave and Buster investment was allowing him for? I mean, like, was there an intent that like, they're all recorded, they should all be put out, but I only have X amount of dollars to do it per quarter or whatever it is?
You look at this record On the Way from '88, this cover. You go and look at the cover of the beginning. It is clearly, that's a record from '99. And that's the same drum kit, the same blue like roll of film. Yeah. So it's like, did you plan this out like as a 30-year project, and then just kind of were like, oh, I'll just keep it going? Like it's almost like this master plan of like mind fuckery. That's just like, when I realized I could do that with the cover of those 2 records, I was like, oh, I can make him stare at himself doing the next thing. I was like, I'm going to bed.
Is it, and this is where I really want like the psych, I want the psych-analysis on that, on the like long con of like, this is the aesthetic, it's all this moment. Is it, could it be some sort of like arrest, like, at 26 or whatever, because like that dude on the cover is younger than Jandek would have been when these records were released. These are clearly from an earlier time period, and there's other little site indicator like clothing and attire. It's like this is an earlier period. Is that the moment of the trauma? You know, like
Yes.
whatever the thing is, and he's in an arrested development state, crystallizing that moment to stretch for all eternity. You know, like
is more often than not, until the mid 2000s records where you can see he has the beard and stuff.
Yeah.
All of these records, anytime you see his face, it's very much like youthful pictures of him. It's always like, 6 and 6 has, him looking very young. Telegraph Melt, who looks young. These all look like they were shot within the course of a year. All of these photos. So I think, if there is mental illness or trauma there, it certainly wouldn't be hard to figure that it stems from that and going back through that particular photo book or reel of photos. Because it's like anytime he's represented on the cover, more often than not, it's very youthful.
Yeah.
So it's strange. Even later records like Shadow of Leaves, he looks like he's probably like a teenager or late 20s. I don't know.
Well, we have 106 more episodes to go to find to solve the mystery.
Well, for those who want to, for those who don't know this record, they want to dig in. You can order it still on CD from Corwood, or you can go on YouTube and search "You Walk Alone" full album and dig in for yourself. Yeah, I'd say it's probably my favorite of the bunch. So I guess we'll, because we did this one first, we don't really have to go in order.
Yeah.
Which is ideal because
yeah.
I don't know. You got anything you want to plug? You can follow Will at Hidden Depth, right?
Yep.
Is it Hidden Depth Rex?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can follow you at Hidden Depth on Instagram. Can we? Are there ways people can buy cassettes off you now?
I believe there's a link in the description. Yeah, click link in description.
I'll post all this shit too.
Yeah. Speaking of, I'm doing like dubbing the last 5 cassettes. They will be going out in a week or two, so everyone will get their copies of the comp. Which is
great!
Amazing compilation featuring Mr. Ian St. George and myself and Tom Carter and a host of others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These are all songs done in quarantine as well, I believe.
Yes.
A lot of them, yeah.
Specifically, maybe kind of Jandek inspired in a way that it's like loner dudes in quarantine.
Exactly.
That was the theme. So
I blame you for putting me on this train.
Well, now I'm pissed because like fuck, I'm gonna have to like cycle back and like walk I'm gonna walk alone down the road of Jandek again to reacquaint myself with.
Well, at this point, all roads lead to Corwood. So
yes,